data requirements, as you're all well aware, hopefully by now, is driven by what? Laws and regulations. So just keep that in mind. So we're not arbitrarily requiring these things. We're obligated by laws and regulations. Now, some of the outline items that we're going over, and it's really, again, like I was saying earlier in the morning and stuff like that, is really brief to script. In fact, I'm sort of glad that Mary Lou came in and gave her presentation because it was a little bit more in depth on some of those issues, especially on the evaluation stations that I'll be touching on briefly versus hers was a little bit more encompassing. So I think her slides are in the book, so that's good reference material and information there. But we'll be going over DPR versus EPA, data requirements, evaluation stations, formatting of the data, very important. Some that you wouldn't think is an issue, but we find that it is an issue. But it is getting better. I did talk to the people that deal with the formatting, indexing of the data, so good for you guys. And then data referencing are substantially similar products. You may be hearing that phrase, but more importantly, that may be dealing with, oh my God, how about out there in webland? Well, it's dealing with bridging of data, trying to use someone else's data, whether it's on file with us or another product that's currently registered. So another thing with DPR versus EPA is something that's very simple concept for the most part. If you submit it to EPA with that data, whether it's acute tox, product chemistry, the whole thing, data, submit it to us, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to meet our requirements. Now, the kicker to that whole thing is the efficacy and the public health. US EPA, dealing with public health issues, pests and what have you, antimicrobial, termites, they're going to require your company to generate that data and actually submit it to them. They don't want to see that. As for all the other things like ag, chemicals, home and garden, they don't require that data, but they expect you to have that available to them in case they call you up and say, we'd like to see that data. So, and again, California, because we're unique, the Republic of California, right? We require efficacy studies on all products. We want to make sure that it's efficacious, it's going to mitigate the pests that we have. Along with that, efficacy studies too also encompasses phytotox issues. Again, like I was saying, if it's public health, EPA is going to require it, so will we. Now, data requirements, we're looking at acute tox, chronic chemistry, environmental fate, and product performance. And unfortunately, Steve Rose was here earlier, and I was going to try to get him in here a little bit, but unfortunately he has other meetings to go to. But he's the one that deals with our new active ingredients, and he should be, I think, in our reference.
And Hyatt Ford also does too.
Oh, Hyatt, keep on. Sorry, my bad.
It's a relatively new position for Hyatt, so.
Maybe one of these days I'll learn. Of course, look at my cell phone. I haven't learned how to use a smartphone yet, so. Some people call it a criminal phone, but anyway. And if it's applicable to your product, phytotox, ecotox, we're looking at worker exposure, then also VOC data, emission data, VOC. Mr. Russell, he deals with that a lot. And then copper leach rate, that's dealing with anti-fouling paints and copper issues in the waterways. So let's get going. So I sort of broke it down to like currently registered active ingredients, you'll say conventional and biochemical and what have you. I thought that might be a little bit easier way of understanding what kind of products we're dealing with. And I may make it more confusing, but let me know. Maybe next year or year before or next. After that, we can change that around. But for now, you're stuck with it the way it is. So we're looking at manufacturing use products, something that we mentioned earlier in the morning session. Manufacturing use products are just that. They're being used in California to formulate another product. Again, data, very simple. 6-pack of data, almost like this. Oh, wait, that's a kegger. Sorry about that. But acute tox data, we're looking at acute oral, acute dermal, inhalation, dermal, all that good stuff. Then product chemistry, different areas and aspects of product chemistry. Now, those are going to be the main data that we're looking at, obviously, because it's not being used for an end-use product. Efficacy, ecotox data, work exposure data is not required. And again, it's to support the end-use product. End-use product, again, 6-pack. Well, it's more like you, a 6-pack young buck. Product chemistry data is the same, very identical. Here's where we get in a little difference. We want the product performance efficacy data, and it must be demonstrated that it's going to mitigate the listed pest on that product label. Okay, and on top of that, a lot of these are more for outdoor use. A like ag or home and garden, what have you, versus the antimicrobial. But the efficacy data and or phytotoxicity data, if it's applicable, we want it done in California-like conditions. Well, what is California-like conditions? We can go on California beaches and just create that data, right? Sit on our beach chairs and maybe dry lab it. No, it's not going to work that way. So just beware, do not dry lab. Years ago, we caught a lab doing that, and it was a major issue. But California-like conditions are, in essence, you bring it to California. This is the easiest thing to do. Just do it in California. It's California-like conditions. Now, if you go outside of California, like maybe Arizona, across the border, or maybe Oregon, Idaho, northern corner, that might be considered California-like conditions. But if you're generating data way outside, Nevada, Louisiana, Texas, or even if you're using data from outside the US, I don't know, Brazil, South America, Asia, what have you, and you want us to consider that, this California-like condition, you better really explain in detail why we should consider that. It could be anything from environmental conditions, humidity, rainfall, soil structure. There's a whole gamut. We're in the process right now in trying to define that better for you registrants to generate that data. So we're pretty close. I know with the, I think it's the EM, surface water or groundwater people, they have somewhat defined that, and that could be found in our notice to registrants on that, stakeholders. Now, ecotox data, if it's applicable, then this is the type of data that they're looking at, mammalian toxicity.
Hold on a second, John. We had a question over here from Nikki.
Hi. So, considering that the climate throughout California varies so wildly from like Northern California to Southern California, like are there ever times that like Canadian data would be considered acceptable, or how do you determine that based considering how varied the California climates are?
Well, that's why it's so diverse, like you were saying. We got microclimates within the coastal area. We got the desert arid areas from Southern California, San Joaquin Valley. We got Northern California that's very wet. So it's pretty dynamic, and that's why we want the data to be generated in California. Now, when you say California-like conditions, like you say Canada data, I think one of the things is that if you look at the product label, okay, where is it being used? On what? If it's, let's say, make it simple, on a crop. Okay, where is that crop grown mainly in California? Okay, and then where is it being grown in Canada? Then make that argument, well, okay, let's say corn. It's being labeled for corn. I want to be able to bridge Canada data for that. And you're going to have to make an argument, well, corn is grown throughout California from northern, central, southern California. So you're going to have to make an argument why, again, we should accept that data or consider it at least. And again, you're going to have to describe the whole parameters of that. I would think that if there's any questions in that, I don't want to go on a diatribe about this whole thing, but check with the RS, and he can get together with the reviewer, depending on what type of material it is. Obviously, if it's a herbicide, rodenticide, insecticide, they would involve the various evaluation scientists for that, and they can give you a little bit more direction on that. But they are working on trying to give you guys more of a criteria guidance on that. So it's a tough question to answer, straightforward like that, but it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Human exposure data too, foliar, dislodgeable foliar residue data. That's something that back in the old days, and sometimes now we may require. So again, that would be data that hopefully you would have on hand or may have to generate it. Now we're looking at any of these products. Again, I just want to reemphasize that some of these reference boxes are very good to go to. But antimicrobial products, these are just some little descriptors or definitions of what we're looking at. Substance or mixtures of substances used to destroy microorganisms, in essence, like viruses, bacteria, fungi, on inanimate objects and surfaces. Now, then we also further break them down to other products, that's microbial products and biochemical products. And some of those consist of microorganisms, bacterium, whereas other ones are derived from natural, such as animals, plants, and bacteria, canola oil, and baking soda. So these are some of the definitions that we look at and may help you when you're looking at your product, bringing it into California, especially on the application form that you looked at earlier. I think there were some sites there, was it a chemical or is it a biochemical or what have you? These should help you filling out the application. If not, call your RS, that's what they're there for. Additional data requirements by California. Why is that? Because we can. No, it's really, we don't do things arbitrarily like that. Lucky for you guys. But really, it's all driven by legislation and regulations. And so, in addition to what US EPA requires, we do require some additional data. Excuse me. Now, some of the things we're looking at, especially with new AIs, Steve Rose, which was here, unfortunately he's not. But there's two areas here.
And Hyatt.
Oh, Hyatt, I'm sorry, Hyatt. Get up here, Hyatt. Throw the water bottle. I understand, truly. Birth Defect Prevention Act, that's additional data that was driven. And these two were enacted back in the 80s, late 80s. So you guys are really young. You probably don't. Okay, I won't even get into that. And the Pesticide Contamination Act. So this is really to protect the sensitive population that we're dealing with, children and infants. And then also the contamination that's dealing with, excuse me, making sure that everybody has clean drinking water. So we're going to address the various pesticides by requiring some additional data on those AIs, pesticides. And then also liquid end-use products. We're going to have data on that along with copper-based anti-fouling paints. There were some additional requirements there too, and adjuvants. So those are basically a quick outline. Again, going with Birth Defect Act, these are some of the data requirements that are now addition to, especially if you're dealing with a new AI. Normally, if you already have an AI registered in California, these requirements here have already been satisfied. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, they weren't, so we did a data call on, and various restaurants were able to generate that data for the current AIs. So, excuse me. So again, adverse effects, reproduction effect, mutagenicity, oncoterogenicity, all dealing with reproduction, chronic effects. And one of the biggest things that sometimes you'll go over in the meeting and hear, oh, we want the chronic tox data. Well, it's a little bit more than that, but we just use that as a general descriptor. Pesticide Prevention Act is to protect the groundwater. One of the biggest things here out of all these studies here is field dissipation. And that's the one that was really a killer for a lot of the restaurants trying to generate that. We want to see how's that product when you spray it to the soil and you use the max amount of water, what happens to it? Where does it leach down? And I think they even took a look at the parent and the derogatants. I could be wrong, is that right? Oh, I know, I'm sorry about that, put you on the spot. But anyway, that was always, for the most part, I think they were able to satisfy this information here about that field dissipation study. And that's the thing, under California or similar environmental conditions, that was always the biggest stickler here for the registrants. But now, again, like I was saying earlier, the EM, Environmental Monitoring Program, they were able to come out with a descriptor on that. I think that was fairly recent, too. I think that may be Section Food and Ag Code, but I want to say I think we may have gone out to a notice to the registrants in that regards. Hopefully I'm right. Could be wrong. Liquid end-use products. When I said liquid end-use products, if your product is liquid ag pesticide product or liquid commercial structural pesticide product, then you're going to have to deal with this, the VOC emissions data. And that's going to be something that, for the most part, a lot of companies, they realize that. They'll submit that data uphand, or we may request that data a little bit later. To satisfy that, what you're going to be doing is giving us thermogravimetric analyst data, or what we call TGA data. Is that, I'm going to put you on again, is that correct? Yeah. Okay, good. And Russell, he works with that program too, so his name's as a reference, phone number, very good to use. And again, that's a little nugget there of gold for you. Take that away. Copper-based anti-fouling paints. Anybody here have any of those? Oh, you did. Lucky.
One of our clients does.
Oh, one of your clients does. All right. Oh, you must be a consultant then. Huh?
And look who she's sitting next to. The guy who does all of the anti-fouling paints.
Ah, there's a little, okay, cool. Well, the thing is with this anti-fouling copper paint, does anybody know why that was designed as a data call or legislation was put forward for that? Probably not. Well, it's dealing with, what we did was we monitored the water sources or areas around the coastal areas, mainly the marines like Newport Beach, Long Beach harbors and stuff like that. And what they found out was that a lot of boats that are in there using these anti-fouling paints, copper-based, that are leaching into the water, and they're or getting up to a toxic level. So that's what we're trying to mitigate right now. So in essence, the data for the product, you're going to have to generate daily mean copper leach rates for each product. And to satisfy that, you cannot cite 100% repack unless it is truly 100% repack with the same color. Now, at the federal level, I know EPA, this consultant there, correct me if I'm wrong, they want to, if you change colors, they want to know and look at that. They critique it the same way, so just be aware of that. And then, again, we were saying earlier, additional colors which may modify active or inert ingredient concentration will require the leach rate data. Adjuvants, one of our favorites, right? You'll notice that says 4-pack. Out of the 6-pack, this is the area that our HHA people look at. In saying that, though, you could probably get away in just submitting that, but myself, err on the side of caution. Just if you have a 6-pack for the adjuvants, go ahead and submit it. It's not going to harm you. At least you have a full database set there for the acute tox data. It's just good practice. And then, which is unique too, chronic tox data is not really required. I think one other philosophy is that usually an adjuvant is going to be used with a pesticide product, and that pesticide product is more inherent toxic than the adjuvant. So, product chemistry data, again, this is just some of the studies within the product chemistry. This is not an absolute, but physical, chemical, source stability, corrosion characteristics, and analytical chemistry. Now, when we're looking at the adjuvants, which is sort of unique, is that if it's going to be used on a food or feed ingredient, it's sort of like their regular conventional materials that we have, pesticides, that they have to be exempt or tolerance established through US EPA. We'll take a look at that. And the way we do that, and you probably already are there because you're younger and you know all these electronic gizmos, websites. We go on US EPA website. They have a great website where you can type in the ingredient, it'll pop it up, it'll tell you whether it's exempt or not. So again, just make sure that when you put an adjuvant package together and you're filling out the product formulation information sheet, that you check and make sure that all those ingredients are either exempt or tolerance established. Because if we miss it, chemistry will catch it. So just make our job a little bit easier. You know, like that old saying goes, help us to help you, right? Yes.
The manufacturing process information, are you asking for manufacturing record, like the manufacturing record?
What do you mean?
Or QC record? Because manufacturing process information.
Yeah, we want the manufacturing process for information and how it's being made, how it's being manufactured, right? You have to,
The procedure and
yeah,
record.
the procedure, right, correct. It'll be, you know, very similar to your regular conventional chemicals that you go to US EPA to register. A lot of this information is identical. They're going to require you to analytical methods and all that. Good question, though. Appreciate it. Product performance, efficacy on adjuvants, no different than the ag chemicals, you know. You guys may get a little frustrated with that, but just keep in mind, hey, it's no different. We require it, just give it to us. In essence, it's support. It's just like a regular pesticide product. Whatever claims are on that adjuvant label, we want data to show that it will do what it's supposed to do. And again, just like all the other data, please generate in California-like conditions if you can. It makes our job easier. I tell you how many times that we'll have people submit data from outside of California, and we'll sit there, or either through emails or what have you, dialogue, or sometimes I'll get UC people involved or what have you to try to make an argument why we should accept it and why those conditions in the other states are not. And after a month of going back and forth, we still can't, you know, agree with them, and you're going to have to submit that data. So it could be frustrating. That's just sort of the nature of the system. Just be patient. Be patient with you, be patient with us, and hopefully we can come to some agreement. Just as long as they see it my way, not just teasing. And additional data, if applicable. Now we're going to go over the evaluation stations. Again, Mary Lou, she was very detailed on that, which was great, makes my job easier, because if it wasn't for her, I really don't have the time to dwell in that in a great deal. But evaluation stations, these are what they're looking at, like Mary Lou was saying earlier, you know, product chemistry, they're looking at product chemistry, environmental fate data. Some of this environmental fate data that they look at We'll also go over to ecotox sometimes and environmental monitoring. Microbiology, they look at the efficacy of the antimicrobial products, wood preservatives, pool spa products, and they will look at aspects of the chemistry too. Excuse me. Pests and diseases, again, another evaluation station, depending on how your product is labeled and the claims that are being done. They look at the efficacy and phytotox data for the various insecticides, fungicides, and nematicides, and also adjuvants if they're making a claim that they're going to be used with a one of those types of products, an insecticide or miticide. Again, in plant physiology, they're more based on the herbicides, plant growth regulators, and again, with adjuvants, if it's being claimed that an adjuvant comes in that is going to enhance a herbicide, growth regulator, they want to take a look at that. And also all ag-related algicides. Now, ecotox, depending on the product label again, it's not really as straightforward as you would think. But ecotox, if it's required, they're going to take a look at the wildlife, mammalian, avian reproduction issues, and they may require, again, acute estuarine or marine organism studies in dealing with that. And they also look at efficacy on rodenticides, anti-fouling paints, and the vertebrate repellents. And they also look at, I think, besides anti-fouling paints, issues sometimes dealing with rice too, but case-by-case basis. Human health, HHA, they're dealing with chronic and acute tox data, and they do look at some of, like Mary Lou was saying, some aspects of worker exposure to human exposure. Worker health and safety, similar human worker exposure, a little bit different, but for the most part, if it's currently registered here in California, HHA will probably encompass the worker health and safety unless the use directions on that product are different enough, unique enough, like a fumigant, then it would go to worker health and safety. And again, they may, depending on what it is, require the dislodgeable foliar residue data. So again, it depends on your label, on where they go in these evaluation stations. Environmental monitoring, like Mary Lou mentioned earlier too. I should have just thrown her presentation up here, it would have made it easier. But anyway, dealing with surface water, potential to move off-site. We want to protect our waterways and everything else. Groundwater, protect our groundwaters, make sure everybody has clean drinking water in essence. And then air protection program. And that's working in conjunction with the Air Resource Board, dealing with various regulations dealing with that. And the thing is, with the air program, it's dealing with the ozone, and it's been identified that various chemicals have properties that affect the ozone. Well, one of the chemicals are agricultural pesticides, and there's certain ones there, growth regulators, right? Sure. Well, there's a handful that will trigger that, but in essence, with the air program, what we're doing is they've given us the lead to address pesticide impact to ozone, and so that's why we're requiring this thermographic gravimetric data, or TGA data, to deal with that, and also drift potential too. Drift potential, I'm not sure if you follow some of the news articles back in the old days, and maybe more presently, that poses a significant issue dealing with air, and also potentially to the surface water too. So there's quite a few things that environmental monitoring looks at and are involved with.
John, we have a question over there.
Oh.
So Mary Lou alluded to this earlier, that the environmental monitoring branch is getting, your package is being sent there if it's recommended by chemistry. Is that how that works only? Or not only, I'm sure you can say, but.
Yeah, things that we route, I guess you could say sort of routinely, and it's sort of specified. Any rice pesticides that come out for pesticides for rice use, we route it over there because there's concerns with water, surface water, drift to sensitive crops. That's always been an issue too. If they look at what comes in on the materials entering evaluation that was brought up earlier, they may want to take a look at that. Anti-fouling paints, they want to be informed on what's going on with that too. So EM, then I think our ecotox are involved with that too. So it just depends on case-by-case basis, but those are the ones that really stand out. So, and again, if they request it to take a look at it, we will route it. Okay. So, Good question. Here we go. Data formatting. Everybody familiar with that? If you guys put your own data together and format it.
One more thing I'd like to bring up too is other stations besides chemistry will make a determination if it needs to go to a different environmental monitoring station. For example, plant physiology may recommend that it should be seen by the air program in environmental monitoring. Ecotox may recommend for the surface water program to review it. And then chemistry, what John was saying, may be recommended for groundwater program.
So they're all interactive, so it just depends on if they feel that needs to go there. So there's no hard, steadfast reason, but it's more on a case-by-case basis.
John, we have a question over here.
When are we informed of it going to environmental monitoring? So if I have a package right now and it's not, as of right now, not going to environmental monitoring, which
Wants to send it there?
no, thank you.
Done.
But I'm just, I don't want any surprises. So it's past chemistry, and if chemistry recommended it, would I be informed now? Like, when would I know?
That's a good question. Normally, it's when you, and that's why it's so important, like Chris was saying, having your email address accurate. So when they put that email address in our database, you'll get a notification when it goes to whatever station. So if it goes to chemistry, you'll get a notification that it went to chemistry, and then when it comes out, and then if it gets routed to work health and safety, or no, environmental monitoring, it'll state that routed to EM on that.
So, Effie, I think what you're asking for is if it's decided that it needs to go to EM,
Yeah.
will you be informed?
Well-
Not until it goes to the station.
Yeah. Well, like I was saying earlier, though, if it's anti-fouling paint or if it's a
Sorry.
rice issue, you could probably be well aware that we may either route it there or at the very least walk it over there and see if they need to formally review it. So, good question.
Sorry, I have one more question. Are there additional data requirements if it does end up at environmental monitoring?
So if there's additional data from environmental monitoring,
Right.
well, there could be. That's the thing with all these evaluations that we take a look at. Once they get into it and they look at the data volumes and or sometimes we'll bridge, if they're satisfied with what we see or what they see in either in the data volumes or the products that we reference, they may not require any additional data, okay? Now that being said, there's been times, a lot of times when they do require data, and like we were saying earlier about the conditional registration, that there may be enough data there to support a conditional, so you may get a registration, but it's conditionally registered. Or there's not enough there, although you did submit data, it's not enough there. And they may, recommend a denial of registration at that point. Now, even saying that, you can have some dialogue with the RS if you feel strongly that the data, really does support, a conditional registration. You just have to make an argument for that. That's why it's so important to work through your RS to convey that information, let them know your position, and then they can get together with the evaluator and then hopefully work out some good compromise. In some cases, we just can't, work out a good compromise, and it's just a negative. It's just the way the nature of the beast is.
Got another question over here.
Hey, so you mentioned rice uses would go to environmental monitoring. Would that also go to chemistry as well, or just environmental
That's a
monitoring?
good question. It could, but normally that would be based on environmental monitoring when we route it over there. They may make a recommendation. Maybe they want some additional environmental fate data or something like that. Who knows? But just sort of a protocol or procedures that we do is that rice, we normally route it over there. So, and a lot of times, they just want to be aware of it. Whereas if it's an active ingredient that has some baggage associated with it, like maybe there's, hazards, aquatic hazards that have been identified, and they have a concern that the water hold period for rice in California is not sufficient enough because of the toxicity values, they may weigh in on that and require some additional, well, they can't require additional label language, but they may say that the label language on there does not mitigate the hazard to aquatic organisms. So in that case, that tells you have to do what? Go back and revise your label at US EPA to mitigate the hazards.
Yeah, very quick question. For example, if I find the data from FDA study and USDA study, can I using them for the EPA six-pack?
Possibly, yeah. We may consider that. What do you think of that?
Do we still have to conduct a lab laboratory work if I already found the data from FDA and USDA. They have a report for it. Can I using
So
that?
what you're doing is you're
USDA.
asking for a waiver?
No, I found because my product is very simple, one chemical. And the chemical, in FDA, they did the study a long time ago, and they still using on their website, and USDA also have the study, so can confirm the product. And when I look at the EPA requirement and on the application for the data, they actually have the data. Can I using their data?
Well, I'll put it this way, we'll entertain it. We can't guarantee that it's going to satisfy all our requirements. And so, I mean, it's like we were going back earlier with the detailed cover letter. It's not a requirement, but highly recommended. And in that cover letter, you can put your argument why we should consider it, Yeah. That's not a really ideal situation, but, like anything, we'll consider it. And we'll never say we'll accept it, but we'll consider it, okay? Okay, binding data. This is something like I was saying earlier in the morning, it's getting much better. Rich hit it, I think, in this program. But anyway, when we're dealing with binding data, just put all the like data together, like all the efficacy and final tox data in one or multiple volumes. Chemistry, the same thing, acute tox and equal tox. Can anybody tell me why we want it that way? About you in the webinar? I know, can't hear very well anyway. The reason why, and this is pretty simplistic, but by doing that, especially with new active ingredients, and don't ask me why we still do this, but new active ingredients, they get shotgun out sequentially to everybody, all the review stations. So in essence, all this data will go to one station, this will go to another station, and acute tox to the other stations. Now, if you mix all this up, one thing, it doesn't fall within our parameters of formatting, but then again, if these stations need to look at that volume and it's involved with another station, that holds up everything. It just makes everything very confusing. Just easier to keep everything separate. Now, I just brought this as a quick little example of what we're looking at.
Actually, to piggyback on what John said, and it was mentioned there in the slide, I know I mentioned it, but again, highly encourage, along with the paper, send it on electronic format of some type.
True. And so this is the standard. I think you're all familiar with this format, binders and stuff like that. So if it's multiple 400 pages, what have you, use this or multiple and make sure it's appropriately labeled. Whereas if it's a smaller volume, you could get away with something like this. Okay, we do see this, but I mean, most of the data is quite encompassing, so normally it's like this. But these are just some examples of what we're looking at. I think you guys are doing a great job in submitting it in this format here. Like I was saying, Amy, she overlook our indexing and stuff like that. She says that the problems with the formatting issues and stuff like that has dropped significantly. So kudos for you guys.
I'd just like to mention too, it's very specific how to format the data, and that is included in the California notice, which is included in your workbook under notices. So make sure to refer to that when you're putting your data together.
Also, one other thing, sorry, John.
Go ahead.
One other thing here is to remember that if your data involves something dealing with color, please make color copies. Because if you make it this nice bar graph of 5 different colors and then you make it in black and white, it's one shade of
Hard to
gray.
decipher. Good
So,
point.
Another thing too, I'm just remembering, is we need it translated into English. So we've had some data results that were in a foreign language. So those need to be in English, please.
And really important, especially when you're dealing with generating the data. I know you folks are dealing with sometimes test numbers. Say, well, this is a TSGGGGG, and it was used on da-da-da-da. But when you submit it for registration, now you're calling it Joe Blow's product, right? Well, we don't know if that Joe Blow's product is correct with that test number. So again, in your cover letter, please explain that these test numbers or what have you are parallel or the same as the brand name so they can identify that. Because chemistry, along with tox, stuff like that, that does become an issue sometimes. And we have to go back and have the registrant explain what it is and identify it for us. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, here we go. Referencing data or substantially similar data. This is something that we love to do. It makes our job a little bit easier to a certain degree. So we're going to be talking about referencing, bridging, considerations, and also realities and what we look at, what's happening, and then also some tips to hopefully help you folks out too. Now, dealing with the referencing of it, this is what we call AB 1011, which you'll probably hear about or hear us talk about quite a bit. But really, it's dealing with our food and ag code up there. Rich is really good about that, citing that number.
It's actually Food and Ag Code 12811.5.
There you go.
It just rolls off the tongue.
But to you seasoned veterans like us now, and you folks now, since you've been here for at least a couple hours, AB 1011 bridging, okay? And what that is allowing us to do, to use existing data that's on file that we reviewed, that's been in-house, or labeling that's currently on file with us. Or, this is the whole kicker, labels on file at DPR. Now, some of those product labels could have been inactive, but we can go back to at least 8 years. And then underneath the existing labels on file, we break it down to as previously evaluated and some previously evaluated. Now, the thing is, with this whole thing, that law, we're not getting into great detail. The most important thing is this referencing, allowing us to bridge across, because that law does deal with cost sharing for you companies to figure that one out. We're not going to get involved with that, just to let you know that. I think I got a couple minutes, but just a quick history. Before this all happened, we used to require a letter of authorization from your companies to allow us to use your data on behalf of someone else. But with this new law, that took away, and now we're able to sort of look at all the different data that we may have on file. That being said, we're not going to look at every piece of data or every label to hopefully satisfy your data requirements. Hopefully, and this will be spelled out later, that you'll spell that out in your recommended cover letter. Okay, bridging. Now, this is just a very simplistic example that I put up there for you. Take a look at that. In essence, in our workbook, I think there's some other criteria dealing with substantially similar products. So take a look at that too when you're looking at that, because this is just a small snippet. Now, it can be simplistic or it can be complex. It's on a case-by-case basis. Just keep that in the back of your mind. In essence, we're trying to register a product that is 50% WP, wettable powder. But we have one that's a 25% wettable powder. Now, what we do is we'll take a look at these two products, and one of the biggest things we're looking at on the efficacy portion of it is based on the equivalency based on the active ingredient. So if you look at the way it's been calculated out in rate, this would be equivalent for the most part. So we should be able to bridge from that. Now, that being said, like I was saying, this is dealing with the efficacy portion of it too. There's other aspects that will be spelled out in our handout, and we're looking at signal word, precautionary statement language, first aid, it could be environmental hazard statement language. There's other nuances there that falls into place. So just don't take this and say, hey, well, this is all we need to know. There's a full gamut of other issues and criteria, again, within our checklist there for you to take a look at. In essence, like I was saying, in that checklist, I think this is a very good representative. We're looking at the active ingredient inerts, especially with the CSF or product formulation information. You'll know what the active ingredient is, but you won't know what the inerts are, or hopefully you won't know, unless you're doing a distributor registration. Then you may be privy to that information. But again, distributor registration, if the primary is already registered, you're already there anyway, so it's a non-issue. We'll also look at use sites, pest, signal word, like I was saying earlier, first aid, environmental hazard statements. There's a whole gamut of things that we're taking a look at and consider. Again, case-by-case basis,